Welcome to VW Classic Fix. I'm Ricky, and today I'm going to be showing you a couple of different ways you can diagnose whether or not your Volkswagen needs a new fuel pump. First thing we've got to do before we start blaming the fuel tank for any issues we've got with trying to start the vehicle or whether it's misfiring or anything like that, we've got to make sure we've got enough gas. So crack the cap, make sure you have got enough gas. Yep, there's plenty there. So there'll be enough gravitational pressure from the gas tank sending the fuel down the line. So now we're going to go to the other end and make sure that our pickup line, our inlet line, is actually letting fuel into the fuel pump itself. Okay, so let's check whether we've got some fuel coming from the tank to the fuel pump itself. So this is obviously our outlet because it's letting fuel out of the fuel pump up towards the carburetor. So this other line here is obviously our inlet, and also because it comes from our fuel line through the firewall here. So loosen this hose clamp and gently wiggle this hose off, pinch it at the same time so that you don't get fuel everywhere, and you can just grab a small container or something like that and just let it drain a little bit of gas, and just make sure that there is gasoline flowing through this and into your container. And at which case, if it is, because we do suspect that the fuel pump is bad, so it should have fuel through here, we can just clamp it up again so it doesn't spill while you're fitting it again, fit it over and tighten it up. So now that we have checked that fuel is getting to the fuel pump, now we want to see whether the fuel pump is indeed pumping fuel. So we take off the top line here, carefully, off the top of the float bowl on the carburetor, and see whether this has any fuel in it. It's pretty obvious if your car has stopped working or you've left it for a few months or something like that. You've come back and you can't start it. You've got to this point, you do suspect the fuel pump. You'll find that this, along with probably most of the float bowl, because you would have pulled all this fuel through, the float bowl will be empty, and this won't be providing any fuel to the float bowl. So this will, in effect, not trickle any fuel. I've had a bad fuel pump go recently on my Combi, and I pulled this off straight away and found this to be dry. So there was no fuel getting up through here. So now if we're quite confident there's no fuel going up through this hose, then we have indeed got a bad fuel pump, and we're going to have to look at removing it, which will be done very shortly, hopefully in a week. We'll be uploading a video on how to replace the fuel pump correctly, and it just points out a few little troubles and foibles and things, just to make sure that when you actually reassemble it, you don't have any push rod locking up issues or anything like that, where your fuel pump only works once and then it locks up and you panic at the side of the road. It's very simple to do, but it's just got to be done correctly. So we'll put up a video about how to replace that shortly, but that's basically how to diagnose a bad fuel pump. In other drastic cases, you can have a fuel pump that is pumping fuel, but at the same time, the seals within the fuel pump here have gone, and what happens is petrol leaks past the cam in here, or the lever arm, and past the spring and everything like that, and will actually flush down through the hole for the push rod and into the engine itself. And I have heard rumours of the bottom of crankcases and things being blown off because too much fuel has actually found its way into the crankcase itself. The gases heat up and expand, and then the whole engine blows out from the bottom end. It's obviously extremely rare, but something you can look for if you're suspicious of a leaky fuel pump. You can obviously remove it, and in here there's a swing lever arm, and that should be covered in wheel bearing grease. When you fit a new one, you'll always pack that with wheel bearing grease. When I pulled mine off, which was leaking into the sump, it was squeaky clean because the petrol had washed all the grease away. So that was a good indication, not to mention it stunk of fuel. And of course there shouldn't be any fuel pooling in the fuel pump block or anything like that, which there was. And another way, little trick, if you're suspicious as well, if you actually sniff the dipstick, you'll find out whether there's any petrol in that oil. It's pretty obvious. It'll either smell like oil, or it'll smell like oil with a hell of a lot of petrol in it. So that's another good thing to do periodically. Just make sure that your oil smells like oil. It sounds a bit silly, but it's just to make sure that there is no fuel gaining access to the engine, which is technically possible thanks to gravity. In this case, a lot of manual fuel pumps are bolted on the side of engines, certainly with American Chevys and things like that from the 50s. even minis and things like that, but these are vertically mounted, so gravity can have its way here and get petrol into the engine. So always good to replace them if you're unsure as well. The sealed units like this are about 35 bucks. But always line up and make sure that they are the same as the one you've taken off. Some of them are an angled unit as well, so we'll sit at an angle and have different inlets and outlets. So you've just got to make sure that you get one that resembles the same height. It's got the same height with the lever arm inside there. This was the one that was leaking fuel, as you can see, hopefully. There's no grease in there at all. So fuel was getting down through here and then into the block. So grab a sealed unit and make sure you check them periodically. Hey, thanks for watching, guys. Don't forget that in the next week or so, I'll have a video up on how to replace your manual fuel pump in your Volkswagen. So be sure to check that out. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the notifications, and check out the other videos.